Welcome to another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. As always, I'm your host, Howard Holton, and I'm here with Nathan from Praetorian.
Nice to meet you. Good to be here.
Nice to meet you as well. So tell me a little bit about yourself and kind of what you guys are doing and what you're focused on.
So personally, my background is I've been in the industry for 20 years. Started in tech, not necessarily security. Sun Microsystems, doing operating systems development, but security bug bit me, and kind of been doing that for the last 20 years. Praetorian itself, we're focused on offensive security. So basic idea is, rather than being on your heels, detecting and reacting to things, let's kind of keep you on your toes, as an offensive partner, and try to stop breaches before they actually occur versus cleaning up messes.
Sure. So the behavior is, I want to replicate what an attacker is going to do.
Exactly.
As close and as effectively as I can get an attack, as if I were an attacker, so that you know what's coming, when it's coming, and what to do.
100%. And the idea being, we know what works, what doesn't, and why, because we are them. We're
Right.
former NSA, TAO, that sort of stuff.
Nice. So, we're here at Blackhat.
Yep.
Still. It's been a long week.
It has. Yeah.
Hacker summer camp.
Yep.
And it's not a small space. It's not a small field. What's interesting that's happening in the space? Like, what are you excited about?
I know it's a bit of a hype cycle, but the AI is super exciting for us. We have maybe a slightly different point of view than most about where the technology is going, and if there are limitations, what they are. But the leverage that capability or that technology is going to provide is pretty remarkable.
Well, let's dig in. What do you mean by the leverage?
To be able to, something that might take 100 people, you can now do it with 10. Something that you can automate 95% of it, and you're kind of starting to pull back and focus on last mile. It just allows you to do things at scale and with automation mixed in with, reasoning, that I think will be game-changing for this industry, not just for our company, but for all the companies across the
Sure. It's important that everybody recognizes whatever's game-changing for offensive security is game-changing for the offense.
Yes.
Right. So that's kind of the challenge. There's no tool that you use that an attacker can't also use.
Correct.
Right. Maybe they don't. Right. But there's none they can't, and they are absolutely looking to leverage AI, and they're likely ahead of all of us.
Yes, and so
Right.
a lot of this, there's a lot of stuff around generative AI, LLMs, super cool, but a lot of the stuff that we're looking at is more around providing an objective and an action, so something called AutoGPT, where you're actually instructing and teaching the system how to perform actions on your behalf, how to hack on your behalf, and that's been super fun, a little bit scary to watch.
Yeah, that would be frightening, right? Again, because you have to keep in mind that the opposition's doing the same thing,
Yes.
right? You always have to assume that whoever your opposition is ahead of you. Otherwise, you will be unprepared when you meet the enemy,
Yes.
right? So it's got to be kind of scary. Let's talk about what is AutoGPT? What does that mean? Like, how does it work? We don't have to get super deep, but from kind of the high level, like, what is that? What does it mean?
So, in terms of a traditional LLM or a ChatGPT, which I think is what...
Traditional.
Right. 18 months later. But a lot of it is, you make a request, it gives a response, right? And so it's you're chatting. This is different in the sense that you're giving it an objective and an action, and so you're stringing together agents with tasks.
Right. So it's an agentic AI, right? Where each agent provides information to the next agent that reacts to provide information with a feedback loop to validate and verify that it's going down the right path, where at the end you have an objective that's being accomplished to some percentage.
Yep. And so actual execution is involved. The system or the machine is actually performing tasks on your behalf.
Right. Does this follow the same kind of agentic rules where without the agent kind of involved and a single source, you're at like 45% efficacy, but you start doing agentic and you're up in the high 80s? Is it kind of that level of change?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's there yet. It's still doing a lot of silly things, so I'll give you an example.
Sure.
You give it an objective, achieve domain administration, don't get caught, right? It'll go through the process and it'll actually successfully execute the attack chain, and it'll achieve the objective, but it'll actually add a user to the domain admins group, which is,
Oh,
anyone
sure.
that does this stuff, you're going to
Right,
immediately get alerted that something happened. And so there still is a degree of intervention and supervision that's
Right.
required.
It's still an LLM, right? It's
Yeah.
still a 4-year-old that ignores your instructions when it wants to ignore your instructions,
Yes.
sometimes at random.
Yes, and so, efficacy going up to 80%. I don't know if we're quite there, but the fascinating and scary part is just watching the trend line of how quickly things are improving. I don't know if it's ever going to get to 100%. We'll see.
Sure.
But it definitely is providing operators leverage, and to your point, the bad guys leverage too.
Yeah, for sure, right? So you have to be really cautious on what you share and what you don't share within kind of how you create, right? Most of us old school security guys, we believe sunlight is the greatest cure for bad security,
Yes.
right? That's the hacker motto should be that, right? And it kind of is. But at the same time, because everyone has access to these tools and AI is so impactful, like, is there a bit of that you treat like intellectual property, where you're like, I'm not going to share this, I'm not going to, you know what I mean? Or do you believe that sunlight cures all wounds in this case?
So I'm going to talk out both sides of my mouth.
Yeah,
That's
please
okay.
do. It is a complex topic, so I don't expect a clear, clean answer. I don't think there's a clear, clean answer anybody could give.
So on the capabilities part of what we're doing is open sourcing everything, and so on that front, to enable defenders to understand how these technologies work, how they can use them to find these material risks before the bad guys do, I'm all for that. We have to be more careful when we get into stuff around AI, proprietary data sets, 0 days.
Sure.
And following even responsible disclosures, we had released an F5 that probably vulnerability that affected maybe 20% of the Fortune 500. We went through the
Small number then, no problem.
Yeah, we went through the responsible disclosure process, did everything I believe to be right, and still we found out a month later that China was using that to break into U.S. government systems, and so. There's a balancing act with it. You don't want to burn the world down in the process.
Sure. I mean, that's security in general, right?
Yep,
Like balancing the ethics plus. You know what I mean? Because it goes beyond just what's ethical. It goes trying to figure out what is right. What is right timing? Like, how does all this work? Because to your point, if it affected 20% of the Fortune 500, it affected 200,000 organizations worldwide, right? Because while they're the biggest, they're also representative of stuff used by everybody. And so at some point you have to go, well, I have to get it out. I can't fix it for 200,000 organizations. I have to get it out there. But, what's the damage? What's the time? What's the, whatever. Right? Like that's probably the biggest challenge within security.
Right. And once we responsibly disclose, you hold back a degree of the information.
For sure.
But even what you do disclose, there's people that will quickly replicate the research and then generate an exploit, and then we're off to the races.
Yeah, and it's a scary race to be in.
Yes. So we've both been in this industry for a while. I think I've been in it for 20 years, and the thing that is concerning to me is in the late 90s, like a bad day in cyber was maybe you got your website defaced. It was a little bit tongue-in-cheek.
But nobody cared about the website. Like your CEO didn't say the website's how we do business.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Right.
There's no monetization, there's no revenue disruption, things like that. But just watching that story arc over the last 20 years go from that to, socioeconomic impact, geopolitical impact, life and limb impact, right? There's now a kinetic effect as everything's digital and physical touch. It is alarming in terms of where the trend line is going and what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's also scary how high the risk is, how high the stakes are, and still how much we have to fight to do basic security things.
Yes.
Right. I would say that, so we've got 12 of these that we're recording during Blackhat, and I would say that the one thing that comes up every time, and I've started to bring it up now, but I wasn't in the beginning, is companies still think MFA can be optional. I don't mean whether they choose MFA or not choose MFA, I mean whether they actually apply MFA consistently. They don't.
Yep.
There are some times where a user has MFA as optional, in which case, just don't have MFA.
Yep. I was just talking to a company a few days ago. They got affected by ransomware a few months back. And it's exactly to your point. It was a remote access tool. The credentials showed up in a breach list and a compromise list. No 2FA. eventually got in through that, and then ultimately it impacted, healthcare systems, premiums, hospitals, stuff like that. And it's just the 80%, just the basic blocking and tackling, we are still struggling with that.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. I mean, I would say like the three things that I wish companies would do is one, security is centralized, it's never distributed. Right? If you allow parts of your security to not be global, whatever global means for your organization, then just don't have them because they're not effective. The second one is avoiding basic data cleansing. Like we've ignored that for so long, and the risk just gets exponential as we continue to add these systems. AI is going to make it so much worse. It's going to increase that risk so much. And then the third one, sad as it might be, I may have forgotten. But I did in fact forget the third one. This is frightening.
Well, to your point about the centralization.
Automation.
Automation.
The lack of mandating automation on our tech teams. We cannot scale without it, and yet most tech teams, they've not changed their operating model, they've not trained for it, they've not focused on it. No one is looking at, hey, we've done this thing 5 times, why are we not fully automating it? You have to automate everything, but there's so much low-hanging fruit that you can automate that does help to fix some of these things and provides you a massive tool that simply does not exist if you don't make it part of your culture, right? So a culture of automation, I think, is the third thing and might be the most critical because it has the ability to impact everything else to such an exponential degree.
Yeah, it's a hard problem to solve, and I mean, for these teams that are dealing with this, they're typically underfunded in terms of budget.
For sure.
They don't have enough folks, and then having the business sort of listen to them, and you're basically managing risk, right? So you're not generating revenue, you're not cutting cost. It's insurance. It's a hard thing for CISOs on down through the organization to deal with. And I saw a stat like for every open rec in cyber, there's like -4 people to fill
Sure.
it. And so how do you deal with that, even if you do have the budget, just getting the staffing in place to put in the automation, like you had mentioned, to put in the things that you had mentioned? It's a tough spot for defenders to be in, for sure.
Well, it has to be a board level priority.
Yes.
Like those 3 things should be a board level priority.
Yes.
And security is a board level priority today, right? But we need it to go to the next level. And I'll be honest, like we need boards to really step up and hire board level advisors or board level members that understand technology and security.
Yes.
Right? I get that it's hard. I get that you don't want to add people. I get all the other stuff. But the reality is there are plenty of us that can talk business, that can talk tech, that can really help boards understand that, and we need to be in the boardroom.
Yes.
An external consultant's not going to do it. Their motivation is completely different.
Yes, I totally agree, and I know there's been some things that have happened with CISOs in terms of liability and things like that, and laying that at their feet. To your point, though, this isn't a security problem. This is a business problem. It's a going concern problem.
100%.
And so it should land and rest with the CEO and the board of directors. And part of what they should be doing is setting expectations with the CISO on what they define as material risk, right? And having a point of view on what is and is not acceptable. And yes, you need an audit committee. You need people that actually have a background in this to govern correctly. Yeah.
I mean, if you're Walmart, you have people that understand warehousing and logistics.
100%.
Right?
100%.
You have people that understand how retail operations work. Right? If you're in manufacturing, you have people that understand how products are made, what the danger is of poor materials, right? Yet at the same time, all businesses are digital, and that is a blank space. In the same it's in the same way that it is in Congress, right? That has to change, just fundamentally.
Yes.
Right?
I totally agree. I totally agree.
So talk to me about like being a startup founder in a open source space, and what is that going to look? What does that look like for you? What is the transition to, really being focused on kind of that revenue growth and that revenue generation, and what does that look like? And then how do you balance that against the part of you that obviously has a love for the ability to give back with open source? Like how do you see managing that as a founder?
So we kind of mentioned this off camera, but the first gig that I had out of college was Sun Microsystems. I was an operating system developer working on something called Solaris. And we learned as a company kind of some hard lessons on what happened to us with open source. And so, Red Hat came in, ultimately kind of ate our lunch. And by the time we understood sort of the power behind open source and we created something called Open Solaris, it was a little bit too late. And I think what I learned from that experience is, particularly the enterprise, what they want is service level agreements. They want support, they want services sort of wrapped around the technology. It's an enablement technology. And so that's kind of the bet that we're making, is that the defensible moats are in the experts and the people, and the defensible moats are in the proprietary data sets. Everything else you should give away for free. And to your point, there is a degree of altruism to it, where you get to give back to the community, they get to contribute as well, and all boats rise together, right?
Right.
Everyone benefits.
A rising tide raises all boats.
Yep.
Amen.
Yep.
Amen. That's really interesting that you bring up Solaris, because I was a bit of a Solaris guy. I was never super heavy into it, and I like Linux ate my lunch too. You know what I mean? Like, it consumed more and more and more of my minutes because I could only use Solaris at the office.
Yep.
Right? So before long, I'm like, oh, this Linux stuff is pretty awesome. I'm going to spend more time here. There's a way bigger community for it, right? Initially, Solaris had more people, but almost overnight, it was like everybody that was in a Nix was in Linux.
Yep.
And then Open Solaris came out, and it was like a fun project. You know what I mean? It was like retro computing almost, to run in your home lab and go, hee, I have Solaris, but I'm doing my real work in something else.
Right. And ultimately, when we did open source, we had some really cool technologies, like things called dtrace and all this other fun stuff. And ultimately, we just watch Linux sort of port that over, because we couldn't figure out the model beyond it. But yeah, so there's certainly a business angle to it, but there's also the altruism of it, and that's kind of the exciting part, to give back to the community as well.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. I think open source truly does raise all boats, and it raises all boats in a really positive way. And I think there's a lot of companies that start with, and people. Open source is people, if we're being honest, right? It's not actually companies, it's people.
Right.
But if we started every open source project around the philosophy of exactly what you're saying, which is the goal of this is to build a better community, right? And I'm going to build a company around the services and things that must be proprietary, right? I think we start to get to a position where this stuff becomes more sustainable.
Yeah, and what you said earlier about light being a disinfectant, having multiple eyeballs on the code base, right? Whether they're part of the company or outside of it, it just helps also make things more inherently secure.
Well, I don't care how big the company gets, the eyeballs all start to look the same.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like all of Google looks at a problem as all of Google. It's not actually different eyeballs. It starts that way, sure, but 3 months it's less, 6 months it's less, a year it's less, by 2 years it's gone.
Yep.
Right? And so you really do need all those different perspectives.
Yep. People from different cultures, different ways of thinking. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, just different locales helps tremendously. Even if it's not a localization issue, right, where you're doing different languages, right? The ability to look at it with a perspective that is as alien as we can get as humans is tremendously helpful. Hey, you're missing this huge thing, or while this has a North American application, predominantly English-speaking application, once you move to this country, we do all of these things differently, and therefore you're not touching, you're barely scratching the surface of what would actually make a difference here, or the maturity in this space, in this place, is something you haven't considered, and therefore, kind of et cetera, right? The ability to kind of exponentially grow the value only exists within open source, and then it's really just about how do I build an ecosystem around that and support an ecosystem around that, promote the ecosystem around that, so that we can continue to get that adoption and continue to get that support. I think tying those together right at the beginning is a great way to go about it, right?
Yep, 100%. And so we released attack surface management open source, breach and attack, like 30 TTPs, and then as we continue to innovate on these various techniques, we'll just continue to open source those with kind of what we talked about earlier.
For sure.
A degree of caution to make sure we're not releasing something that could negatively affect organizations and things like that. Sure.
I mean, the ethical implications of supporting the community, but also protecting the world,
Yep.
is something that I mean, we all kind of wrestle with, and the closer you are to offensive security, the more you have to wrestle with it.
Right.
Right? And so for those out there that are buyers and not, sitting in this space, pay attention to that. Like, these are questions you should be asking of your vendors. Right? How do you manage the ethics of that exact thing? How do you manage the ethics of it when I'm not where it's discovered, or maybe you don't know that affects me, but it does in fact affect me, and every minute that goes by allows someone else to find that path, right? Like, what does that look like for the vendors that you deal with? These are questions you really should be asking of your vendors, of your people, and should be on your checklist. And if it seems like it's the first time they've been asked, they're probably not ready to help you.
Yep. And
right.
Everything should come from, a first principles point of view. And so if a first principle is we need to leave things better than when we found them, that will help sort of guide which is sort of a narrow line to walk, to make sure we're informing everyone but not doing it in a destructive way.
For sure. So what do you recommend companies should do today when thinking about offensive security and what it looks like for them today and what it will look like for them in the future, right? Because we've got AI right now that's changing offensive security. And tomorrow, whatever date tomorrow is, we've got quantum.
I think, just doing this for 20 years, offensive security pen testing, it's been around for 2 decades. It started with the ISS folks and Foundstone and on Aztec and all those great companies. It's a pretty interesting story arc to watch from where it was to, I think over time it got a little bit commoditized, and with that there's a saying, if you pay bananas you get monkeys, and I think offensive security penetration testing got kind of devalued, where it became sort of a check the box exercise. I'm seeing that starting to change and come back again, and I think one of the big things that has shifted that thinking is a core part of a cybersecurity program is it's not just a capstone project, but do it in a continuous way, where just like you're detecting and responding to incidents every day, you should be having someone keeping you on your toes, making sure that you're finding these things before the bad guys do.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part, right? For years we've been saying no more projects, only products. Right? Projects have a defined start and end date.
Yep.
Products are enduring.
Yep.
And most of what we do is enduring. It's not actually a project.
Right.
Right? Okay, cool. You implemented a new ERP, but now it's running, so it's a product. It never was a project.
Right.
Right? You may change the phase of the product. Right? What is the product life cycle? You may change the point you're at in the life cycle. And security very much needs to be the same thing.
Yes, 100%.
Right?
Your organization is not static. Your product is not static, and so offensive security shouldn't be either. We push code to production 10 times a day.
Sure.
And so in that sort of environment, you do need some sort of continuous nature of constantly looking at these things.
Yeah, forever, right?
Yep.
And, right, data is the business.
Yes.
Right? And so protecting the data also needs to be the business.
Yes.
And if it's just projects, it stops being the business. And if it's just this thing that we do with the few bit of crumbs from the couch cushions that we can put together to do it, to your point, if you pay bananas, you're going to get monkeys.
Right. And that all of this is about, data and what we were discussing with board of directors and CISOs. I think that's, what the board owes their CISO is define what a bad day is, in your 10K, what is material risk, what type of data is that? Is it PHI? Is it HIPAA? Is it intellectual property? Go find where that lives in the organization, put big circles around it, and that's what you need to protect. Don't keep boiling oceans.
Yeah,
You
100%.
are going to get compromised, but the trick is to make sure it's not a material compromise, one that would affect shareholders.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's been the purpose and point of Zero Trust since the beginning, right? How do I reduce the blast radius to the point where it's manageable?
Mm-hmm.
And every time I say that's not going to be manageable, well, I haven't reduced the blast radius enough, and that's where I need to concentrate.
Yep.
Right? The faster I can start doing those things, the faster I can make those investments, the faster they'll pay off. Right? Like EIM. Right? We've been kicking the can down the road on data management as long as I've been alive.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a problem then, and our data sets were 1% of 1% of 1% of the size they are now. Like, I got started when computers had 2 5.25-inch floppy drives, right? And today, that's a horrible, horrible, horrible joke. And yet we're no better at data management today. We're worse at data management today than we were then, if anything, right? So
it's a hard problem. I mean, even with, to your point about zero trust, when you're dealing with legacy environments and high degrees of complexity, it's hard to implement. It's much easier on an evergreen. But there are opportunities everywhere to start putting in those controls. And so when companies, for example, do M&A, that is a perfect opportunity to think about something like zero trust and how do you incorporate those two organizations together. So if one gets compromised, there isn't a cascading effect into the into the other organization.
Well, and perfection is the enemy of progress.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Stop thinking we have to do it perfect right now. Stop thinking we have to do it all right now.
Yep.
And just go look. How can we find all the PII that we're unaware of? Right.
Yep.
If you just start there and then go, cool, what do we do with it when we find it? Do we lock it, remove it, move it someplace else, put it in, whatever it happens to be? Just those two things, right? You don't have to look everywhere, but if you're like, we're going to look in this place, and every time we find it, we're going to do this. If we just took our unstructured data and said, if you find PII, replace it with text that says, this has been moved to secure system number 7, and then move it to secure system number 7.
Yep. And
Right.
to your point, start with situational awareness, 1% improvement every week, right? Atomic habits, just keep moving the ball down the field.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, right? Do it the same way we establish habits in ourselves
Right.
and make change within ourselves, right? We all know that if you decide tomorrow to go to the gym and start P90X, which I don't even know is freaking relevant, you can tell I don't go to the gym, you're going to fail. Right? If you start by tomorrow I'm going to work out and I'm just going to start by running a marathon, you will run a quarter of the distance you thought you could run, go home, and then never run again.
And to your point, the word marathon, that's, and this being evergreen and into perpetuity, it is a marathon, not a sprint. And so
That's very true.
Yeah, you just need to get better every week, every day.
That's very true. That's very true. So, how can people find you?
Praetorian.com is where you can find us. We've been around for about 14, 15 years at this point. But yeah, check us out on our website.
Nice. And where are you going to be next?
So I'll be here through part of DEF CON, and then I'll head on. Beyond, are you talking about conference circuits or?
Okay.
The other thing I'm doing, if it's all right to bring up in terms of something to find out about, is where Warlock Stay Up Late, so people can also find me there, which is going to be a podcast like this documenting the history of cybersecurity.
That's
and
awesome.
So I'll be very enthralled and engaged in that for a few years to come. It's 119 interviews so far, so.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun, right?
Yep.
Seeing kind of how this industry started, and I think the evolutionary story of some of the people that have been around a while is going to be interesting to kind of see, right? If you go back to the beginnings of cybersecurity, it wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Right? It was a bunch of nerds trying to figure out how to break stuff.
Yep.
That then eventually became a practice and then a discipline.
And that's the exact, starting from that origin story to the birth of an industry, to your point, and just making sure, I'm 43 now, and when I talk to the young folks that we're hiring, you mention names like Eric Bloodaxe or Frack or Route or whatever the case is. They don't know where their industry comes from, and so we want to try to change that by memorializing history.
I mean, if you hired a 23-year-old today, they've never heard of Dialtone.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's where it all started. More than anything else, right? Hacking phone systems is where it all started.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's a little weird to go, hey, the shoulders of the giants you're standing on, those giants started with something that went ee.
Red boxes and blue boxes, even Frack,
yeah.
right? Freakers and hackers combined. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun. So this has been another episode of Discover Disruptions in Tech. Please like, share, subscribe, follow, comment, and let us know what you'd like to see. I'd love to hear from you. If you've got comments, let us know, and we'll see you on our next episode.